For more than a year now, we've been bringing a message of change to every corner of this country. And today, for the first time in a long time, we're bringing this message to the good people of Pennsylvania. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking with folks all across this state, from Pittsburgh to Harrisburg, from Philadelphia to Wilkes-Barre. I'll visit factories and farms and small towns and big cities, and I'll hear directly from working men and women about the challenges they're facing. But we know that many of these challenges aren't unique to Pennsylvania, because whether it's the rising cost of health care or a tank of gas that's more than $3 a gallon, oil hit $109 a barrel today, or wages that aren't much higher than they were a generation ago. The challenges that people are facing here aren't all that different from the ones that I'm hearing about as I travel all across this country. I realize that politicians come before you every election and they say that they're going to change all this. They lay out big plans and hold events just like this one because it's popular to do and it's easy to make promises in the heat of a campaign, but all too often everyone goes back to Washington and nothing changes. It's business as usual, because the lobbyists write another check, or because politicians spend time worrying about how they'll win the next election instead of why they should win the next election, because they're focused on who's up and who's down instead of who matters: the worker who's lost his pension, or the family that's had to put up a for sale sign because they're at the risk of foreclosure, the young woman who gets 3 hours sleep a night because she's going to school and working in the night shift and still can't afford all the health care that she needs for her family. These are the Americans that need real change, the kind of change that's more than just switching political parties in the White House. They need change in our politics. They need leadership that can end the division in Washington so we can stop just talking about our challenges and start solving them. Who doesn't defend lobbyists as part of the system, but sees them as part of a problem. Who actually says what he or she means and means what he or she says. And who will be the voice for middle class and working Americans every day for the next 4 years. And I intend to be that president. I'll be the president who strengthens our middle class by learning from what's happened in places like Fairless Hills. When U.S. Steel was at its peak here in the 1970s, there were nearly 10,000 people working at this facility. And as you know all too well, U.S. Steel closed down most of its operations here in the years that followed. And by the early 1990s, there were less than 100 people working here. But thanks to the leadership of people like Congressman Murphy and companies like Gamesa and the steel workers who fought to make sure that the jobs here pay a good wage, Fairless Hills is doing what Americans have always done in times of challenge and uncertainty. You're reclaiming your own future, and you're turning Bucks County into a center of green jobs in America. And these kinds of jobs will only become more important in the coming years, because green jobs are the jobs of the future, not just because they pay well and can't be outsourced, and not just because they help strengthen our economy and lift up our middle class, but because they help us reduce our dependence on foreign oil and may just save this planet for our children. Today we are part of a global economy in which we need to compete and we need to win. Trade is important as part of that economy, and we can't shrink from that challenge. But I'm going to make sure that our trade deals have strong labor and environmental protections to help keep jobs here in Pennsylvania. And I intend to pass what I call the Patriot Employer Act that I've been fighting for since I ran for the Senate. We are going to take away tax breaks for companies that are shipping jobs overseas and invest those tax breaks in companies that are investing right here in the United States of America, companies that create good jobs with good wages here in the United States. I also want to make sure that we're providing tax breaks to workers and not just the wealthy few. So we're going to put $1,000 per family in tax cuts for working families and struggling homeowners, and I'll eliminate the income tax for seniors who are bringing in less than $50,000 a year, because they are already struggling and they need the help. And I intend to bring Democrats and Republicans together to finally pass universal health care and cut the cost of a typical family's premiums by up to $2,500 per family per year, because it is time that every American had the kind of health care that I have as a member of Congress. And for 3 years, I worked as a community organizer helping folks who had lost their jobs at the steel plants try to figure out how they could find new work that paid a decent wage. I know what it's like. I have seen the costs of bad policy and neglect from Washington on neighborhoods and on families. That's how I got involved in public service. And whenever I think about why I got into politics, it's the voices of those men and women and those children that I first heard so many years ago, and I keep on hearing. And those are the voices that I carried with me to the Illinois Senate, where I brought Democrats and Republicans together to expand health insurance for 150,000 children and parents, where I led tax breaks of $100 million for working families who really need them. Those are the voices I carried with me to Washington, where the first bill I introduced was to make college more affordable, where I fought against a bankruptcy bill that made it harder for families to climb out of debt, and where I passed the most sweeping lobbying reform in a generation. Ethics reforms that made sure that lobbyists couldn't give gifts and meals and lend corporate jets to members of Congress, so they would actually be accountable to you as opposed to special interests in Washington. And those are the voices that I intend to carry with me to the White House if you're willing to work with me and fight with me. If you're willing to stop settling for what the cynics tell you you have to accept and reach for what we know is possible, which is a government that is working on behalf of the American people.